Welcome back to Long COVID Doctor, an educational series for long COVID sufferers. I'm Dr. Tim Robinson, 30 years a GP, family doctor, and now for 5 years I've been only working in long COVID services. I podcast on a regular basis, all the usual podcast channels, and also on YouTube. I hope you find them helpful. And if you do, obviously, click subscribe. I want to build up as many followers as possible, not for my own personal gain, but I just want to get this information out to you, this trusted information out to as many of you who have long COVID as possible. So, like I said, click subscribe or share these postings. Thanks for any feedback that I'm getting from you, which is a lot, I have to say. And I, in advance, apologize because I just don't have the time to reply to all your queries, your concerns, and the symptoms you are sort of mentioning to me in your comments, etc. I wish I did have the time. I just don't have that time. But please keep them coming because they actually help me with my future postings. So, and then finally, the usual disclaimer, you've heard it before, any treatments or strategies or anything I mentioned that, in these podcasts are obviously talk to your doctor, talk to your family physician before you consider them. So there we go. Right. Okie doke. This is the update in dizziness in long COVID. Yes, it is a common problem. It's one of my top 10 common problems in long COVID. It's a large topic and complicated. So what I've done is divided it into two parts because I know that with a lot of you with fatigue and cognitive impairment, brain fog, too much information, spending too much time concentrating is quite challenging. And so I've divided it into two parts to make it more digestible, less tiring. So in the first part, I'm going to talk about the diagnoses of what are our patients experiencing when they say they have got dizziness. What do they mean by that? What's behind the symptom? I then want to, as before with other podcasts, I just want to cover the causes for those symptoms, and in particular, dizziness. What brings about that symptom? So that's part one. Part two is really focused on the treatments, the strategies, how we go about helping you with those symptoms of dizziness. So here we go. What are our patients telling us when they come to us with their list of symptoms, and one of which is dizziness? Well, it's all to do with the description, and one person's interpretation of the word dizziness is different from the next person's interpretation of dizziness. And so it is incumbent of the doctor to actually try and unravel it and get to the root cause. Okay. So what are our patients saying? Well, basically they're saying, well, I feel dizzy, I feel giddy, I feel like the room is spinning, I've got vertigo, that sort of thing. Or they're saying, I feel wobbly, unsteady, like being on a boat or a pontoon, like being drunk. Interesting. Or they're saying, I feel lightheaded, I feel faint, like I'm going to black out. So already you get the thread in that there are lots of different interpretations of the word dizziness. It encapsulates many different variations on that theme. Dizziness is just one word, but it describes So many different symptoms, and everyone's different, and everyone has different interpretations. And so I think the important thing is the detail of that word, the description that the patient is telling us, is the most important thing. Because, wait for it, because that leads us to the diagnosis. And in a way, I've sort of outlined the three types of presentation, again, under that umbrella term of dizziness, but already you realize that there are three types of groups of symptoms. And actually, that's very convenient because those three groups of symptoms actually lead us to three groups of conditions, and hence three types of diagnoses. So let's go through them step by each one in turn. So first of all was, the diagnosis of dizziness. Okay, what are people saying? This is the group that say, I feel dizzy, I feel giddy, I've got vertigo, doctor. It's like the room is spinning. Okay, that type of thing. Okay, like being on a roller coaster or a fun ride. Okay, round and round and round. There are various diagnoses that present with that type of, in inverted commas, dizziness. Okay, and I'll run through them. First of all, labyrinthitis vestibulitis. Secondly, BPPV. I'll talk about each in turn. Thirdly, Meniere's disease. Fourthly, vestibular migraine. So when we look at them each in turn. So labyrinthitis vestibulitis. That's inflammation of the inner ear labyrinth or the vestibule. These are parts of the balance system in the inner ear. Okay? So if that labyrinth system is inflamed in any way, then that and what would inflame it? A viral infection, of course. Okay, yeah. And what is COVID? SARS-CoV-2 virus. So that virus can bring about inflammation of the labyrinth or the vestibule, the inner ear, that is responsible for your balance. Okay, it tells you where your head is in relation to your body, in relation to solid earth. Okay, so if those systems are inflamed, then that's going to lead to our old friendly dizziness. Not friendly at all. Second diagnosis was BPPV. Okay, what does that stand for? Benign positional postural benign positional paroxysmal vertigo. So that is diagnosed with something called the Hall-Pike test. Okay, so the ear, nose, and throat surgeons will put you through, or GP who's aware of this, as knowledgeable about this, can put you through a particular sequence of movements of the head relative to the body and look for movements of the eyes, something called nystagmus. Okay. So BPPV, classically, when you put your head through these sequence of positions, then triggers off this juddering of the eye movements. Okay, nystagmus. That's diagnostic of BPPV. That's something to do with what we call otoliths, little granules within the semicircular canals within the inner ear to do with balance. The next is Meniere's disease, which is a horrible condition, diagnosed on the grounds of the triad of symptoms: vertigo, head spinning, deafness, loss of hearing in one ear, and ringing in the ear. That triad equals a diagnosis of Meniere's disease. And with it comes this vertigo, this dizziness. And then the fourth diagnosis, vestibular migraine. This is probably more common than is realized. So if you like, it's the migrainous process, not happening with classic or common migraine, but it's the migrainous process happening in probably the arteries, the mini arteries that feed the inner ear, okay, that then lead to this migrainous dizziness, okay. It may be associated with someone who has a past history or current history or family history of migraine. So you want to ask about those things. But vestibular migraine is it's an awful condition with this dizziness and this nausea and tinnitus also. Along with this dizzy, giddy, vertigo type, room spinning type of dizziness, you may have nausea. You may have, I've mentioned this already, haven't I? This ringing in the ears. You may have hearing loss. So those are associated symptoms that obviously, you're going to want to bring to the attention of the doctor at the same time. So that's our first diagnosis of dizziness. Right, on to the second diagnosis of dizziness. So this is the group of patients who say, yeah, I'm dizzy. And what I mean by that is that I feel wobbly and steady, like being on a boat, like being drunk. It's that type of symptom complex, okay? When you ask, well, what do you mean by dizziness? And they say wobbly, unsteady, like being on a boat. Ah, right. That distinguishes it from the other two presentations of dizziness. The commonest cause for this type of wobbly, unsteady, like being on a boat on a pontoon type of dizziness is what we call arthritis, wear and tear arthritis, osteoarthritis of the neck. So cervical spondylosis. So the cervical vertebrae, okay, basically below the skull before the thoracic vertebrae. There are 7 of those are cervical vertebrae. And in between each cervical vertebrae are receptors that they're called proprioceptors that tell us where our head is in relation to our body, where our head is in relation to the, terra firma, the solid earth around us, okay? And they feed all those impulses to us in order to keep us on the straight and narrow, upright, okay? So this arthritis, arthritis in the neck is extremely common. Everyone above 50 is going to have a degree of cervical spondylosis, wear and tear arthritis. It's common. Patients describe sort of it, not only this sort of the dizziness that occurs with it, but also they describe it's like having sand in my neck. Okay, when I turn my head, it's like very fine sand, in between my vertebrae, crunching away, or clicking of your neck, etc., in various positions. And with it, because there's arthritis, no surprises, the range of movement might be reduced to a degree. So all these things are important to try and sort of elicit. There may be associated symptoms with cervical spondylosis. There may be numbness down one arm or the other. Not the same, not both, okay? So numbness or pins and needles down the arm. There may be associated neck pain, arm pain, yeah? With the nerve in the neck being pinched. May bring about tension headaches. It may so in other words, you may have a form of headache because of inflammation around the cervical vertebrae. So that's the second group of dizzy patients, the wobbly, unsteady ones. And then the third group of dizzy patients. These are the ones who say, I feel lightheaded, I feel faint, feel like I'm about to black out. The cause for this is dysautonomia. Again, we've covered dysautonomia in other podcasts and YouTube videos. You ought to look at those just to refresh your memory. Dysautonomia, what is dysautonomia? Dysautonomia is dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. Dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. So abbreviated is dysautonomia. Okay, autonomic nervous system, remember, controls those things in the body that happen automatically, like heart rate, like breathing rate, like blood pressure, like temperature control. So, dysautonomia. And, why have we got dysautonomia? We've got dysautonomia because inflammation of the excessive inflammation, excessive immune function, excessive cytokines, lots of these excessive inflammatory processes causing their ill effects all around the body, particularly in the brainstem that controls, wait for it, balance, blood pressure, pulse. So there may be, dysautonomia is a complicated, big subject, but there may be associated symptoms. Like I said, autonomic nervous system controls temperature, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, etc. So if it controls temperature, therefore it's no surprise if you've got dysautonomia, you may have sweating, you may feel excessively cold and chilly and icy, you may be clammy, you may have visual disturbance, everything going black, seeing parts because your blood pressure's dropped, because you've got dysautonomia, or you may have palpitations because, there's blood pooling in the legs and there's not enough coming up into the heart and hence the brain, and then that causes tachycardia, palpitations. But also dysautonomia, there's a crossover between dysautonomia and mast cell activation. Listen to the podcast on mast cell activation. So it's a complicated one. But remember, this type of dizziness is more the lightheaded, faint feeling, I'm going to black out type of dizziness. So what should you do about it? If you have dizziness, what are you going to do about it? Well, if it's really troublesome, you're going to want to go to the doctor, aren't you? It's a new symptom. As I keep saying, let's not be COVID blind, and let's, ask for help. We've got to get a diagnosis. So, and what will the doctor do? The doctor will ask the story. What are the types of dizziness? Describe your dizziness. Is it like being on a boat, or are you going to black out? You get my drift, okay? Or is the room spinning, etc.? So it all comes down to what you mean by dizziness and the description that you then describe to the doctor. The doctor will obviously want to do your pulse and your blood pressure and all those right things, and maybe want to do some investigations according to what the history and examination has revealed. Again, the doctor, as always, will be on their lookout for red flags. Sudden fainting, that's serious, isn't it? Sudden dizziness, likewise. Sudden headache, even more serious. Irregular heartbeat, chest pain. All these allied symptoms are red flags, maybe suggestive of a more serious condition that you need referral to, cardiology or neurology or ear, nose and throat specialists, etc. So, I've talked about, in depth, the importance of knowing the causes. And as I've said always, it's really important because the causes, the story tells us the diagnosis tells us the treatments, but also it validates it. It's not sort of dreamt up. It's not all in the head. It gives you peace of mind. It helps your acceptance. So there we are. There's a lot of information I've just imparted to you, and I hope that I've made it nice and easy to understand and distinguish quite clearly the difference between those three separate groups of disease symptoms. So that's the end of the first part. So, I want to now tell you about the treatments and the strategies of how we're going to approach it and deal with it. This dizziness that is, like I said, in my top 10 of common presenting symptoms of patients that we see in our clinics in the Long Covid services. So, okay. Hopefully you found that interesting. And look, let's see you in the second part. All the best then. See you soon. Bye.